Mark Grayson's rematch with Conquest is not just a continuation of their earlier conflict. It is a complete redefinition of how Mark approaches stronger enemies that he cannot beat. What makes this encounter so compelling is not simply its brutality, but the quiet, crucial shift in Mark's thinking that underpins every decision he makes. This is the moment where instinct gives way to intention, where emotion is sharpened into strategy, and where Mark proves that growth is not measured only in strength, but in understanding. To fully appreciate the significance of the rematch, it is important to revisit the psychological aftermath of their first battle. Mark's initial encounter with Conquest shattered any illusion that determination alone could close the gap between himself and people who are stronger. Conquest was not merely more powerful. He was relentless, sadistic, and utterly confident in his superiority. Mark's resistance, while admirable, was ultimately insufficient.
Getting mad doesn't make you stronger. That's not how it works.
His victory came through the intervention of Adam Eve, whose temporary transcendence of her limits turned the tide. Even then, the result was incomplete. Conquest's defeat lingered as proof that Mark had not truly solved the problem, he had only delayed it. That unresolved failure becomes the foundation for Mark's transformation. By the time of their rematch, he carries not just physical scars, but intellectual ones. When he sees that Conquest is alive, he no longer assumes that pushing harder will yield a different outcome. This is a critical shift. He recognizes a hard truth. If he engages Conquest on equal terms, trading blows, testing endurance, relying on brute force, he will lose, regardless of how much stronger he has become since their last encounter. This awareness is not defeatist. It is liberating. It allows Mark to think creatively. Instead of asking, "How do I beat Conquest in a fight?" he asks a more precise question. What is the one way I can actually end this?
No. There's no way.
This is what happens when you don't finish what you started, boy.
You're never breathing again.
That distinction is everything. It reframes the battle from a contest of dominance into a problem to be solved. When Mark chooses to choke Conquest, he is not improvising blindly. He is executing the only viable strategy available to him. Suffocation is one of the few methods that can bypass the otherwise overwhelming durability of a Viltrumite. It does not rely on being stronger. It relies on being persistent. It transforms the fight into a race of endurance under conditions that neutralize some of Conquest's advantages. In essence, Mark forces Conquest into a scenario where raw power is no longer the sole determining factor. However, recognizing the correct strategy is only half the battle. The real challenge lies in committing to it fully, especially when the cost becomes unbearable. Conquest's response to being choked is brutal and horrifying. After realizing that punches will not force Mark to let go, he decides to drive his hand through Mark's stomach and begins to disembowel him. This is not just physical damage. It is an attempt to break Mark's resolve, to force him to abandon his plan through sheer agony. At this point, the fight reaches its philosophical core. Mark is confronted with a choice that defines who he is: release his grip and maybe survive, or hold on and risk dying in order to ensure Conquest's death. There is no middle ground. There is no safe option. What makes this moment extraordinary is that Mark does not hesitate. He understands the stakes with absolute clarity. Letting go means failure, not just for himself, but for everyone. Conquest would threaten if he survives. So Mark refuses to let go. This act transforms the battle from a physical struggle into a testament of willpower. Pain becomes irrelevant, not because it diminishes, but because Mark refuses to prioritize it. His body is failing, organs damaged, strength fading, life slipping away. Yet he remains focused. He is no longer reacting to Conquest. He is imposing an outcome. This is a level of mental discipline and resolve that Mark had not demonstrated before. In earlier fights, pain often dictated his actions, pushing him into desperation or rage. Here, pain is acknowledged but ultimately ignored. Equally significant is the way Mark applies the lesson from his first encounter. Previously, he believed that overwhelming physical destruction, crushing Conquest's head, would suffice. That assumption proved dangerously naive. In the rematch, Mark corrects that mistake. He chooses a method that eliminates ambiguity. Suffocation is not about damage, it is about inevitability. It ensures that Conquest cannot simply recover as he did before. This is Mark thinking beyond the immediate moment and considering the long-term consequences of his actions. And there is also a symbolic rejection embedded in this decision. Conquest embodies the Viltrumite ideal: strength above all, dominance through force, and the belief that power justifies itself.
To me, there is no greater pleasure than feeling the warmth of my fists drenched in blood. Beating you, conquering your pathetic planet, it's too easy!
By defeating him through strategy and endurance rather than superior strength, Mark undermines that philosophy. He demonstrates that intelligence and adaptability are just as powerful, if not more so, than brute force. Yet perhaps the most powerful aspect of this moment is how it redefines the meaning of Mark's name. Invincible has always been a paradox. Mark bleeds, breaks, and suffers more visibly than most heroes. But in this fight, the name becomes literal in a different sense. Invincibility is not about being untouchable, it is about being unyielding. Mark cannot stop Conquest from injuring him. He cannot prevent the pain, but he can refuse to let those things dictate his actions. He can choose to endure, and he does. Even as Conquest tears into him, even as his body reaches its limits, Mark's grip does not loosen. That is the defining image of the fight, not the destruction, not the gore, but the unwavering hold of someone who has decided that failure is not an option.
I don't care how strong you are. I can see the future. You don't live to see tomorrow.
It is in this moment, suspended between life and death, that Mark truly earns the title Invincible. By the end of the rematch, Mark has achieved something far more important than revenge or even victory. He has proven that he can think under pressure, adapt to overwhelming odds, and commit to a course of action no matter the personal cost. He has shown that he is capable of learning from failure and applying those lessons in the most critical moments. And perhaps most importantly, he has demonstrated that true strength lies not in overpowering an opponent, but in refusing to let go when everything in you is telling you to. In defeating Conquest this way, Mark does not just win a fight, he redefines himself. He has truly become